Hey Flock, Mike here from Epic Duck Studios, and welcome to the Epic Hobby. Today I'm going to be painting up an S-type Shinobi from Privateer Press's Monster Apocalypse in comic style. So this is an S-type Shinobi from Privateer Press's Monster Apocalypse. It's a small unit that basically is meant to emulate a sort of a Power Rangers character, only at a larger scale, because a human is, this tall in Monster Apocalypse. So the idea is that these are guys that kind of have that Ultraman power where they turn into a much larger version of themselves to fight monsters. And then the, monsters for this faction are just even bigger ninjas, so that's what's really cool about them. I'm going to be doing this in a sort of modified version of my comic style, where I'm starting with this super white base coat, and I'm going to do all my black lining before I do any highlights or any base coating, so that I reach a point that looks like a black and white comic. And then I'm going to add the color using thin glazes. And I found I like doing this style because it gives me something that looks really close to sort of golden age comic. So I like to kind of think of this approach as Jack Kirby does Super Sentai. What I'm going to be using to begin with is Higgins Black Magic drawing ink. And I'm going to be using a AS Handover Series 33 size 000 brush to apply it. Now, because I'm only really doing a whole lot of black and then a couple of solid colors after, I'm not going to bother including the wet palette in this video because it's not going to give you a lot of information. So, comic style, I can really break this down now into a couple different steps as far as the black goes. The first step is to simply outline areas or to isolate areas. So that's coming, between the hips and the leg, between the leg and the knee, between the knee and the boot, between the chest and the shoulder, chest and the neck, neck and the head. And basically taking each distinct element and outlining it. So it's not adding any detail that's not already there. It's just as if you were drawing the outlines on paper. So we're not concerned with shading or any sort of, hatching or any other kind of detailing right now. We're just concerned with breaking the model up into parts. The singular problem with recording videos is that I have to sit a little farther back to make room for the boom mic in front of my face, and so I'm not as close to the model as I'm used to being, and that leads to tiny little mistakes that I normally wouldn't make in person. So one thing I try to teach with comic style is just ignore your mistakes until the very end. Like, for example, this tiny little bit here I've got on the hip. I could obsess with it and already come in and try and cover that with some white paint, but I can probably just include that in this crease here. Maybe if I couldn't, I could add a tiny little bit of shading or even just, a smudge mark or something. There's a lot of ways to hide a mistake that don't involve, actually painting over it. And you don't know for sure how that's all going to come together until you're done inking. Now, if you're doing a more traditional, doing the base coats first and all the ink second, you might need to fix some mistakes of your base coat before you start inking, but even then, you can often incorporate them into some shading or, like I say, a smudge mark, some other kind of detail. So it's not always necessary to fix your mistakes as you make them. Now under the arm is going to be a heavily shadowed area, so even though I'm not on that step yet, I'm just going to blot a bunch of ink in there now, because it'll make it a little bit easier when I get there. And it makes the line that I was just working on kind of irrelevant, which makes my life just a little bit easier here. Here I'm going to separate the sort of forearm from the elbow. Now the space between the helmet and the chest plate, there's this little area in here. I'm going to probably allow more black ink there than is really needed. What I'm trying to do here is come at a high angle of attack so that I hit the back side of the collar here. I'm going to work that around. Again, just kind of coming almost straight down in so that the ink hits the back of the collar instead of the neck. And then on this side, his neck is, you know, butted right up against it. So I do just sort of have to let that taper into a line. And here, we just basically want to just move that into being a line between the helmet and the torso. And then we just sort of want to flip that process and separate the neck from the helmet. And it kind of, it's a little bit of a jumpsuit. It sort of, you know, comes up behind the helmet to the back of the head here. And the only problem is because this miniature's got a two-pointed stance, it wiggles quite a bit, you know, front to back. It'd be a good reason to glue it to a base before you paint it. But of course, with it being a clear acrylic base, that's how you risk, you know, getting paint all over the base. Now the fix to that is just to cover your base in a masking solution, so covering it in masking tape or painter's tape or even Scotch tape will work. It's got this little sort of jetpack thing. I'm going to separate it too. You can see we've got a nice deep line under the torso bit here, but over here it's a little thinner, and from, you know, a heads-up angle, you just don't see it at all. So what I want to do is just come in here and make that a little more pronounced. Now shading will also take care of that later. There we go. So that's the result of our first step, just outlining each of the different details, kind of isolating them from whatever's nearby. Now we're just going to continue basically the same process, working into the smaller details now. So I'm going to be like outlining this sort of gem on the knee pad from the calf from this sort of, let's call it an anklet, I guess. You know, the sole of the boot from the rest of the boot and so on. Just kind of working my way around, adding more and more smaller black lines now. So one kind of interesting detail is the crotch plate that belongs to this belt. See, the belt, you know, curves around both sides, and it goes all the way around the back, but the crotch plate doesn't come back up and connect. It's not underwear. It just kind of stops right there. Now, trying to outline around this under the leg is a little bit awkward, but this whole area, much like the underarm, is going to be shadow later, so we can just not worry about it and just fill that in right now with some black ink. And we don't want to go too far because we're not sure exactly how much we want to kind of bring out onto, you know, the glutes, you know, the back of the thigh and so on. And then later we can worry about, you know, we'll bring lines out here, kind of shape the buttocks and so on. So you can see there's areas like the little bulging muscles in the back of the calf, you know, the buttocks themselves. There's little muscle definition areas that we don't really want to outline yet, and little things like the fold in the fabric here coming up to the crotch plate. They're just not important yet. They're we can fill them in later. That's kind of more of like a detailing step. Right now I'm more concerned with the sort of like what I would call like sub-assemblies, I guess, where you're putting together like a plastic model. And like here we're gonna separate the wrist from the forearm. We can even take that a little step further and start to isolate these fingers. So here I'm trying to just add a little bit of detail around the thumb. You can start to see though, that's looking pretty striking and detailed on camera. It does really start to bring the miniature together. Now the backpack, much like the neck, has this sort of, you know, cut in area. And so again, we're using that sort of high angle of attack to get in there with the black ink. Now there's a little gemstone or something similar here in the middle of his chest. We're going to isolate that out as well. And now we're going to try and sort of pick out the collar from the rest of the chest here. And just coming around the back of the collar here. Now we can start to give the face a little bit of detail as well. There's sort of some overlapping segments to this helmet. I have to be careful here because there was actually just a little bit of mold line I didn't quite clean up right, and I don't want to accidentally interpret that as detail I'm trying to work with. Now these sort of little flanges on the side of the head, we can just black them out from this angle, because from the back they're not too important. And what that'll do is when viewed from profile, they'll have a nice sharp sort of black line around them. And the trick is to use without your brush curling around and accidentally inking the front too. And then we just continuously repeat this process, just aiming for smaller and smaller details. Like for example, I'm going to come up, there's a panel line here running along the helmet, and then that sort of his eye comes out of that panel line. So you're going to follow the line first. You're going to be careful, you don't want to just black out his whole eye, which it kind of looks like I just did. There's a little bit of it there. This is one of those cases where I'm probably going to go in and fix it after. I did accidentally black out his whole eye. So just to show you, I've actually got one model here already finished, and that's how the eye looks on a finished model. You can see it just sits outside the, or inside that black line. So I'll correct this in a moment. We'll get some ink or some paint out and redefine that eye. I do usually say in comic style, just, run with your mistakes, leave them where they happen, but when you obliterate a major detail like an eyeball by accident, it's okay to, spend some time correcting that. You need to be just a little bit more careful on this side. Alright, and now let's see if we can outline the bottom of that eye. That's a little better. Even this one I'll come in and just add a little bit of white just to make them more obvious. Alright, now we can start to define the panel lines in the chest here. So in a way, we're just doing the same thing over and over again. We're kind of working from big detail to small detail. We're continuously working on finer and finer lining. And the reason for that is because sometimes a model, obviously miniatures aren't really designed with this kind of painting in mind. With some models, I almost feel like this style of painting is a bit of an argument with it, because the model's not really designed for it. You look at Infinity models, and they're so overblown with detail, super fine detail, that this lining process kind of becomes a chore, and at some point actually just becomes impossible. There's a like you look at sort of like almost every Infinity model has some sort of like a hexagon texture or something similar to the clothing they wear under their armor, the sort of under armor, if you will. And you usually see that in knee joints and up at the top of the thigh, and areas like that. And there's so many tiny little, sub-millimeter hexagons that you just couldn't possibly outline them all with black ink and maintain any amount of your sanity. And so that's why I sort of like working with, start with big details and work smaller and smaller, because it makes it easy to identify the point where you've gotten small enough and you just can't reasonably get smaller. And that's when you can just start to ignore detail instead of trying to work with it and argue against it. Like these fingers are pretty small. I'd say about the extent to how small I'd like to get. And here, as before, I'm just using the fact that this will all be a shadow later to my advantage. I'm just blotting in some black ink around the thumb. That line went a little bit thick. Again, if I feel like it's too thick later, I can, hit it with a little bit of white paint. Because, yeah, that one finger kind of just disappeared. So what I'm doing right now is just want to take some black just around the sole of the boot. Now the belt doesn't exactly have a line there, but what it does have is a very sharp crease. So I'm trying to follow just underneath that crease. So before I go much further here, I'm going to take a little bit of P3 Mora White and just fix those eyes that I accidentally filled in. So I want to try and keep this in the center of the black area, ideally. Alright, there's one. Now let's go for the other side. There's a few tiny little mistakes. I normally try to avoid fixing mistakes as I go. But since I have the white out already, I'm going to take a little bit of advantage of that. All right, there we go. So now I want to really start getting into the more gritty level detail. And that's going to be doing things like defining the sort of this sharp crest in the middle of the helmet. Same thing with sort of these knee pads. They have this sort of, you know, sharp V and some other angles to them. Even the anklets have the same thing, as well as picking out, you know, softer details like the abs. So the abs here, you don't really have to, you know, fully paint all of them. You just sort of, you know, need to imply that they're there. Just kind of define the shape a bit. So I'm just going to come underneath this one, and not all the way. Same thing over here. I'm just going to just hint at their shape with a little bit of a line work. And there's little folds in the fabric here. And start to just give them a little bit of shape now. Now there are also these little sort of circular details on the elbows, and there's two on the back of the backpack as well. I want to make sure we outline those. Now with those, you don't have to fully outline them. You just have to, you know, kind of hint that they exist. You can do that by just kind of doing, you know, roughly half or 3/4 of a circle. There's also one on the inside of the arm here. There's a sharp crease in the backpack here, so I want to try and draw a little bit of attention to that. Those little circles on the backpack are really hard to outline. So that's pretty much all of the sort of inner details done now. So the last thing I want to do is actually start to bring just some of the actual comic book appearance in. So that's going to be really deep black shading and some sort of, you know, the feel of sketchiness, right? The feel of hand drawn detail. So what I like to do is sort of the inside of the thigh here, just black that out entirely, because it's on the underside of the model and you just don't really see it. And the intent is that you get a nice stark black line when sort of viewed in profile. And you can kind of do that for anything that's basically like a downward facing surface. You know, the thighs are the most obvious large detail to do this on, but they're certainly not the only one. Here I'm going to bring a fair bit of black in. I want to leave a little bit of white at each end so you can just tell it apart from the thigh. I don't want it to blend together. And the sort of underside of these cuffs, I'm going to do kind of the same. Go half black, then alternates, leave a little bit of white, then go mostly black again. Alternate, leave a little bit of white, mostly black, and alternate, leave a little bit of white, and go black. And just repeat over here. Now this one I've already got kind of black coming to this side. So I'm just going to follow the leader there. And that's one of the reasons I like to say just, you know, leave your mistakes alone, because usually you can just kind of work with them. They don't really have to be mistakes. They can be happy accidents. You can Bob Ross it up. And at the feet here, I'm going to just add a little bit of black to the inside of the foot. And that just sort of makes it look like there's that little, you know, concave indent there. And gives us that sort of, you know, shadow and profile, right? Here again on the calf, I'm going to just kind of do the same. You can see now I'm kind of doing it more as like a series of small jagged lines as opposed to a solid block. And that gives it a nice sort of broken up edge. So here I'm going to do what I did on the other side and just bring a lot of black in. I'm going to start to focus it towards the bottom because this knee is kind of sitting downward a little bit. And then when we look at it, we've got, you know, white sitting here. So on this opposite knee, I'm going to do more of the black towards the bottom here instead. Now with these, you know, the cuffs here, I want them to look like they're kind of reflecting some environment. So I'm going to add just some jagged dark areas that aren't particularly symbolic of anything. They just help break up the big solid block of color, and having some sort of shadow being cast kind of implies a more reflective surface. So it makes them look more metallic than, you know, if they'd just been painted flat yellow might. So now here we're going to start to shape that, you know, that dark area I've already made. I'm going to sort of shape it up into the, you know, the bottom of the buttock here. I'm just going to, you know, break that line up a little bit, make it less one-dimensional. Two. And there's actually a small panel line here in the belt I missed. I'm just going to hit that right now. And the belt, because it's sort of there's a bit of a concave to it here, I want to have a shadow in that concave spot. Now I can start to get a little sketchy with how the body kind of comes together where things overlap, like these two panels here, I can, you know, maybe thicken the line up a little bit. Add maybe a little bit of a cast shadow by using some hatch marks here. Here where the arm and the torso meet, and just actually add a little more black now. Make it look like it's, you know, there's a little more depth to it, a little more implied shadow. Now the arms themselves, we can kind of take the same approach as the legs and just black out anything that's facing downward. But with the hand, we've got that little sort of armor plate on the back of the hand. I'm going to make sure I leave at least a little bit of color around the outside of it. And because we have an arm there, there's going to be a little bit of a cast shadow underneath it. So I'm just going to add some, you know, darkness kind of coming all the way to the belt there. So each knee here has this sort of little diamond on it. What I want to do is just kind of accent that fact a little bit. You know, they're pretty small, so I don't want to put a lot of effort into painting the details. What we can do is start with a little cross on it and then just, you know, exaggerate basically two opposite faces. And that helps, you know, sell the look of it being a diamond. And that I will touch up with a little white in a moment. So I just want to make a few other surfaces look shiny by adding in some kind of quasi-environmental shadows. The idea that something, you know, darker is nearby and is being reflected. And lastly, you can just add a little bit of extra, you know, jagginess and cross hatching to just really make it look more hand-drawn. You can do that to just about any part of the model here. You know, anywhere you've got a line, you can just build it out a little bit. Oh, I missed a bicep. Just notice the small mold line, or rather panel line on the back of the wrist here. You don't really see it on this one because it's somewhere in that shadow. So as with the left arm, I just want to add a little bit of a cast shadow underneath the right arm. Just this little area where plate's a little less likely to get to. If you find you have any really large areas with no detail on them, you can just add little blemishes. So just little, like, you know, half circles, or even just little straight lines. They actually go a long way to breaking up the surface and making it look like there might be, you know, a little more texture there than we don't know about, whether that's, you know, rips and tears in the clothing, little bits of dirt, oil stains, you know, maybe even just a cast shadow or a reflection, something we just can't see. So we're really at the point here where there's no detail left to add. There's just a couple tiny mistakes to fix. There's the one on the knee there, and then one of the feet right here had a little smudge on it. And that was just a result of me touching wet ink, which we obviously don't want. Alright, now with the black inking done, it's time to get some color on this model. And I'm going to be doing that almost entirely with Citadel shades or glazes. So using Cassandora yellow with a little bit of Seraphim sepia, and those two will form the gold parts of the armor. Using some Gilliman blue glaze for some random details, such as his eyes and those little power dots. And then I'm going to be using Daler Rowney turquoise ink for the major areas of the clothing. So sort of, you know, the thighs, the forearms, so on. And I'm going to start with the Daler Rowney ink. So the reason I like to use inks for this now, because I've laid down my black ink already, I don't want to obscure it, and most paints are very opaque. So what I want to do is I want to just tint my surfaces without, you know, hiding that underlying black. It's my first time using this turquoise ink, and I'm actually not loving it right now. It's not going on very smoothly. I'm going to try just load the brush a little bit more and see if that helps. That ink's actually a little bit on the opaque side. You can see it actually started to cover up the those two little black scratches I did. So I'm going to be just a little careful with it. Most of the Daler Rowney inks are quite translucent, but this one is a little on the opaque side. And that's a bit of a surprise. So now that we know that, we can prepare for it and be a little more cautious around our edges. It's actually kind of weirding me out that this ink isn't translucent. when the other artist inks I work with so far have been. So that little dot on the armor, I'm just going to leave it alone. So I'm going to use some Cassandora yellow for some gold aspects of the armor. So that's going to be the chest plate, the belt, the ankle cuffs, the back of the hands, and of course the face. You can see this is actually like a truly translucent color where I'm just going right over the black with it, and it just has virtually no impact. And you can see how quickly I'm coloring the model as a result of that. Oh, I missed a little bit of turquoise around his neck. Now I like to detail that Cassandora yellow with just a little bit of sepia to just add some deeper tones to it. But I'm going to wait just a little bit to make sure that sepia dries completely. So next up I'm going to use a little bit of Gilman blue glaze. And we'll also just get that turquoise on the neck very quickly here before we continue. So now the Gilman blue I'm going to use on the little diamonds as well as the eyes and the little circle bits on the arms and back. and whatever this thing is in the middle of his belt. Now these ones are going to look just a little bit weird because I accidentally got some yellow on them. I could repaint them, you know, with a little bit of white first, but I'm not overly concerned about it. And I missed the back of the hands with the yellow. Just going to get it out a third time here. So now I'm going to add just a little bit of Seraphim Sepia to the yellow spots. And this is solely just to add some depth to the color. Makes it look more gold instead of yellow. Actually, as I'm using it, I'm trying to leave little puddles of it as opposed to just brushing it on. So the very last thing I want to do is go back in and touch up a little bit of the black that the turquoise kind of eradicated. The panel line right here. A little bit of this shading. And there we have it. The S-Type Shinobi in a Golden Age comic style is completed, and I really love how this looks. I was a little disappointed with that turquoise ink. I wasn't expecting it to be so opaque. Like I say, I've worked with a few other inks. I've actually got 4 of these models now. So I've got a blue, green, and purple, and none of them had that same problem where the ink was actually overpowering the black a little bit. So there's something specific to the turquoise ink that makes it just a little bit more opaque than the other ones. But the important part is I've now got a full team of these Super Sentai, giant ninjas ready to just punch some aliens in the face. Hey, if you enjoyed this video here on YouTube, please hit like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you get notifications when I post new videos. You can also join me at twitch.tv/epicduckstudios on Thursday, Friday, and Sunday evenings at 8:30 p.m. Eastern for live painting and sculpting shows. If you'd like to support this show, you can do that at patreon.com/epicduck. Every little bit helps cover the costs of paint, models, and all my video production gear, but more importantly, it helps keep food in my kid's belly and a roof over his head. I'd like to give a huge thank you to all of my patrons and Twitch subscribers, both past and present. Your ongoing support and encouragement is really what makes this possible. Thanks for watching, and until next time, do something epic.